So it falls to me at this point to try and give some of the information about what we've been doing. A number of you I know were here last year, or we have met at various conferences or various places during the course of the year. So I'll try and give an update on where we've got to. I've put into the save the date element there the date of the next conference on the 3rd of July. I expect to see you all taking notes and writing that down before we go anywhere. But we're trying to keep around this sort of time for giving this, because obviously we always manage to hit a sunny day for it. As Paul was saying, these were the original groups that we started out, so these were the lead areas, and we did so in collaboration with the Internet of Things Security Foundation. So we essentially tried to align our working groups and the working elements that we had with those that were originally in the Internet of Things Security Foundation, so that we could get outcomes that could go between the two. Because we were very conscious in the area of electronics, that a lot of the stuff that we were talking about was actually stuff that was also relevant. So we do a lot of the elements for that group in terms of talking about safety critical components and how do they fit, whereas they're possibly more concerned with some of the consumer elements. So that we've learned over the last year that the fusion between the two is actually quite significant. But one of the things that we've done over the last year is parked all of that lot. Not that we've parked it as areas of expertise. We have those areas of expertise, but having done some original work in relation to that, what we basically do is bank that, and we use that as expertise and bring that to actually talking about our subject area. And the reason that we renamed as digital resilience and survivability was in discussion with the OEMs, in discussion with our constituency. That was actually the thing that really mattered to them. They really care about, and people really care about, not just the fact that it's secure today, because that would be nice and that we're able to do things, but actually how we'll be able to talk about the fact that it's secure in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time. This is a long-term project that we have, and that's actually one of the things that is most important. So we've tried to concentrate on that kind of stuff. We put up the list of people. If you want to see your name on that next year, feel free to come along, and we will be very happy to incorporate you. Oops, there we go. So generally this is what we've tried to do. Some of you may have seen these slides before, but I will talk to this. It's pretty much, I don't have a lot of slides here, that wasn't the intention. So essentially it was to try and get to a position where we can work out what we're doing. The big thing on the previous slide was the make a difference. We have tried not to concentrate on doing exactly the same things that everybody else does. In collecting the standards and things of this nature, which my colleagues did a wonderful job on, I believe we came up with around about 15 pages of A4 of standards and guidance and regulations that people were supposed to be following. We were pretty certain that nobody was following that, since it took us a lot of time to actually work out what all of those were, and nothing that's complex can actually be something that you're following. So we've banked that, and instead of that, what we've tried to concentrate is what do we need to do going forward. We took the roadmaps from that were proposed by the Automotive Council that Paul showed, and we've concentrated on when and where do we think things are going to emerge. So we've tried to time these things around when do we have to have things available to give people advice. And we use connected cars as an example quite a lot. Yeah. So we're not necessarily looking at fully autonomous vehicles, but we do believe that if you're not looking at connected cars, you're not looking at where we're going to be. And we use the 7 areas now as areas of expert focus, so we're able to bring those things to the party. We also try to say we're not talking about, it works well on a group that's talking about the AESIN security work stream, but we try and say we're not talking about cybersecurity and we're not talking about security. Our observation is nobody buys security in its own right. You buy it in order to achieve something else. It is not an end goal in its own right. And that's where we came out with this diagram at the bottom here. You came out with a diagram essentially which we dialogued through the group of trying to look at the difference between the security requirements that support safety, or the security requirements that support personally identifiable information, or most importantly for this sector, the security requirements that allow you to monetize the data that you've got in the vehicle or off board from the vehicle and enable new business models. And we started to talk about how do those things actually differ from each other. So what you'll see there is some of the observations about what courts will you end up with, the fact that if I'm doing safety, largely I don't want anything encrypted. I'd much rather it was authenticated because I can't actually deal with encrypted stuff. And it's used as a vehicle to talk about what is this complex system that we're actually trying to deal with. It's used, for instance, as a mechanism in terms of processors for actually talking about things that are to do with, for instance, all of this data is present on the same processor at the same time. Could you architecturally separate that? No, probably not. You know, how are people protecting one piece of data in the car from another piece of, and these sorts of elements that go with it, and what problems those are creating, as well as what opportunities they are creating. One of the things we use this to observe is we don't think we can actually find a system on which there will be no way of getting in, and I'm very conscious that last year our friends from CCAV talked about the conflicts between competition and what data you want to own and those things that you might want to do from a safety point of view. So the work that we have done has started to be embodied in the way that our colleagues are talking about things, the way that government is talking about things, in such a way that we've started to recognise some of the problems here. There isn't some silver bullet by which we can do these things. There is no mechanism by which we can make all of these things totally secure and nobody will ever have an accident or whatever. Over in the top corner there, in the diagram, we've started to talk about, and one of the things that we talked about just before this conference last year, and is one of the things that we've continued to pursue, are what are the security techniques, what are the engineering techniques by which you manage to achieve what you're looking at, what we're looking at going forward. And our observations were, we think we can upgun the things that we have done as an industry, probably, in order to look at doing autonomy level 3 and some of the basic connectivities. But actually, if we're looking at the sorts of things that the Automotive Council was looking at in the near future and going out into the 2020s and 2030s, that is not something that we can do by doing a bit more of some of the engineering techniques that we've been looking at. And that's why we've started to look at some of the problems that will be associated with that. And when we go through, I'll explain how that has manifested itself into the various sections of what we put into this conference today. We've input into various sector deals. These are not things that have come to fruition yet, but certainly we work closely with Meridian, we work closely with other organisations, and we talk to the Auto Council. We try and make sure that these are things where we actually input into these things, not just from the money point of view, though that is obviously important. We are an organisation that's trying to make sure that the industry is properly funded to solve the problems it has to solve, but from the point of view of making sure that these things are guided in the direction and with the expertise of the groups of companies that you have there. And it's as we tried to show, it's actually a well-founded group going everywhere from OEMs through to specialist suppliers and academics. We hoped we might have something in relation to adding cyber to the MOT. Last conference we presented that as a possibility, and we are in discussion about how we might move forward on a feasibility study for doing that kind of stuff. But we've not brought that to conclusion yet. And that is, again, in a way it's useful because this is part of actually moving things from a discussion of a trade body to something that's actually being operationalised into something. And those things take time, so we continue with that. We've also been particularly interested in the at-scale infrastructure. We've been conscious that many of our OEMs have essentially been looking at what does all of this mean and being very conscious that they need to look at things much more widely than just the vehicle. And we've not necessarily as an industry been helping them to do so. So we've tried to make sure that we're actually looking at those sorts of areas. And last year I talked about the fact we were just trying to put up a skills survey, and we have done so, and I'll give you some of the outcomes from that on the next slide. So we have been through and we've tried to do this and tried to go through and do a skills survey. So last year we were talking about, we had a really good conference. The NCSC came along and they presented what I'm glad to say was our most requested presentation from that conference, which talked about how they were educating and helping to fund and educate everybody from 11-year-olds upwards, which was really great. Yeah, and I think that was truly awesome. And the fact that it's the most requested one actually was also part of the problem, in that most people were not conscious of that at all, so it wasn't flickering into people's consciousness. We had a lot of people talking about, so if we improve MISRA C, or what have I got to do? I've got to educate garage technicians to understand PKIs and things of this nature. You know, what is this skill problem that I'm actually looking at, and what have I got there? And we had a general discussion around those sorts of things, and opened up, if you like, a lot of the can of worms that we then tried to put together a survey on. Members of the group have paid personally to try and put together this survey, and we have done so. Our problem has been that we've had limited funding. So unfortunately the results of what should be an anonymous survey actually are attributable, because we haven't managed to get, but we concentrated on making sure that we had something that was well-founded from a science point of view. So what we didn't want to do was ask the question in such a way that we loaded the answer so that it was basically the conclusion we come to in the first place. So those of you that know about doing proper scientific surveys, and I'm not one of those, will know that these things are difficult to do in such a way that you can get something proper. So our skills survey nevertheless covered 3 OEMs, 12 tier suppliers, 20 specialist suppliers, actually a couple of academics, but they're actually more problematic on some of these things. 36 engineering departments responded, 6 HR departments, 4 academics and 2 operational departments. So as you can see, there was an opportunity to go much wider than this, but I don't have the effort inside the group at the moment. So one of the things we are doing is looking to try and find sources of funding to take that more widely. And some of the conclusions that came out of that, nobody from the NCSC training effort has actually ended up in this industry, not one. And I'd like to give an overall thing on this. So the conclusion from all of this was a lot of money is being spent, a lot of attention is being paid, and that actually a lot of people are trying to do the right thing. It is not a question of lots of people trying to do the wrong thing. Or huge problems around those. The problem that this seemed to exhibit much more than that was structural difficulties in where things didn't quite join up, so you didn't quite get the right effects from these things. So I do think there is a major opportunity associated with this for government, for industry, for all sorts of things, to try and address what were the structural problems in this, and get a much better outcome without spending a lot of extra money that comes from that. So nobody.
Can I sort to interrupt? You say 0 from the training effort ended up in the industry. Do we know where they went? And please tell me it's not finance.
So a significant number ended up in finance. They pay a lot of money. And I do have, so I was doing a survey that was asking people in this industry. So for other reasons, I've got some idea of where some of those ended up, and I'm sure MCSC and the universities concerned have probably got a better handle on where some of these things went to. So it would, we can have a chat afterwards, but this survey was not designed to actually reveal that information. So if I ask somebody from an HR department in the car industry, they don't know. They just know we didn't get anybody from that initiative. I think so. I think, as I say, I think for other reasons we've got some reason to know where a lot of these people ended up. Back in the NCSC. No, some did. But part of this was a lack of cyber-physical systems and advanced techniques was actually cited. So the fact that people were actually being trained on digital systems, but actually these were cyber-physical systems that we were going into. So the knowledge state was not exactly a fit for this industry in many cases. A lot of the difficulties using effectively cyber skills. So one of the observations that we were getting back was that it's very easy if you've got a department that's been doing braking systems for the last 50 years and is populated and has got a scale and knows what it's doing, and you bring in an apprentice, it's very easy to to educate that apprentice further on the job to the things that they need to know in order to take this forward. It's very hard if you bring in a single cybersecurity individual who doesn't necessarily have the experience of the industry, and nor do the people in the industry have the experience to actually try and, so that aspect of, so how do we make that join in the first place in order to get to the right place, was not working well. And in fact, the only place it seems to work is in the academic and research aspects of some of the companies, where it's much more of an academic environment anyway. So you're looking at different types of things there. But those people don't necessarily. So that use effectively of cyber skills. So even though we've got skills, we actually find it hard to use them. And that, it seems to me, is an observation, because normally we'll say there aren't skills out there. Actually, that wasn't necessarily what was being said. It's just I can't use it. Getting the correct syllabus offered by apprenticeship suppliers and universities, and that wasn't a criticism of either of those. That was merely an observation that at a time when we don't know what it is we want, it's really hard. It's really hard to ask for it. If you can't ask for it, then it's very hard for a provider to provide it. So they end up providing what they think you might want, or what you said you wanted 5 years ago, and it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that you can't move forward on those things. So structurally, that was actually quite a difficult thing. There were a lot of people trying to do the right thing, and oddly on both sides of what shouldn't be a divide, trying to nudge towards the right solutions, but finding that sort of beyond what could be achieved in many cases. Advice by specialist suppliers not understanding the industry. So a lot of people that understood cryptography or understood cybersecurity in a particular environment, but didn't understand how that actually fitted into this industry. And again, they were trying to give good advice, but the people asking didn't know necessarily what to ask for, and if you can't ask for the right thing, you can't get the right. So it's this aspect of we need to get the skills better distributed so that actually you can get to the right position. HR departments, and normally I diss HR departments completely, because I obviously hate them. However, firstly, I would say that they were extremely good. 6 of them responded. They took this seriously. So that was a significant response that we got. And one of their observations is, if they get a thing asking them to recruit 20 cybersecurity specialists, they have to commoditize it. You have to have a thing of asking for this. And in doing so, at a time when actually they didn't have the experience through the organisations, and in fact what you were looking for was individuals to seed capability through, they didn't really have a way of asking for those sorts of things. So a vocabulary to ask for the things that they needed was just not there. And that was very difficult for them to create, and it is difficult in a situation where you're trying to do a volume acquisition of a capability you just don't have. And there are very few people to help you. And the last one came out of identifying and retraining of in-house resource. So arising from a number of interactions that the AESIN group had with a number of the respondents, they'd actually understood that they were looking for different types of capability. Often they were looking for fundamental maths capability, for instance, in relation to some of the machine learning things. And one of them I know gave me a thing on that they've been looking at. How would we find the right people for doing this? And they'd had a workshop of 10 people, and they discovered 3 of the people in their workshop had PhDs in cryptography. They were not on staff as cryptographers. They were not on staff to use their maths at all. And though they were actually quite interested in developing into this area, that went with one of the other observations, having identified people that probably had the right basic skills, actually working out how to get them then trained up into the areas they needed to. That proved so difficult to do, and I checked back with them just before this conference, and that was 6 months ago, and they still failed to find a way to actually take forward getting people skills and getting what are actually the 12 years of skills of teaching people how to do things, getting that actually so they can direct it at the problem space. So this is a short summary of some of the conclusions that came out of that. As I say, honestly, it looks like it's bad, but it's not bad. It's actually people trying to do the right stuff, but it is a symptom of a lot of structural issues that are associated with that, that I think if we could help people to solve that, we would get a lot better outcomes in terms of application of skills to the problem areas and people having the right sorts of things, and we could move forward in a way that we will need to, and that the security work stream has identified that we need to. So, as I say, we would like to publish this, but in order to do so, we have to get this to a scale, and we have to find some funding for that. So, apologies to the group, but I've given you more or less as much as I can without starting to attribute it to individual people, which is not a fair thing to be doing in this instance. Have I more or less got to my time?
Yes.
So in that case, I get to the end there. But I would like to talk about just one more thing on the thank you sign. So we've set this meeting up today to talk under 3 subject areas, and they're the ones that more or less came out of last conference, and the ones that as a group we've been working on. We set it up to talk about the at-scale infrastructure, because whereas last time we concentrated a lot on, how do we do the processor, why do I want to put, roots of trust into my process. One of the things that it was obvious was of concern to our constituency was the fact that this was actually part of a much larger infrastructure, and that was actually the significant thing going forward. It was the connectivity, and getting ourselves to a position where we could recognise that we couldn't draw a boundary around the car, and that it was actually part of this stuff was a fundamental set of things. And the problem space that went with that was important, but actually the opportunity to learn from some of the things that people are doing in that space is, if you like, trying to bring back one of the other themes. We put a second one up there, which essentially was associated with an observation that where we were standardising things, it was really important that we concentrated on what we standardised on how, that we didn't standardise on things that we didn't know how to do. We learnt how to do it and then thought about standardising it, not the other way around. And that actually doing that in such a way that it could not be operationalised was actually a problem. So one of the talks that got away on this one that I had hoped we might have has been from one of the OEMs and a lawyer at one of the OEMs who has been pointing out that they now contract and require patching on anything to do with a cyber incident from all of their supply chain as part of their fundamental contracts. There is no money to support that, and no economic model that makes that viable, and no engineering technique to allow their suppliers to make that viable. So from my point of view, one of the things that I think that would mean that this group should be looking at over the next year, and again, I would invite you to consider and talk about, our observation is that current cyber insurance is largely based around data and data theft and things of this nature. The idea of actually ensuring supply chain against its disappearance in the face of an economic model, and that people are being, is one of the things I think we need to talk about, because this country is actually good at doing insurance and it's good at doing this kind of stuff. If we can put that stuff together, we will have a much more robust supply chain. That may not be your opinion, and that's the kind of stuff that we invite you to discuss, and that's one of the things that we would like to get as an outcome. And the last section that we put up is designed to talk about some of the elements. So I know that many of you will know these, but it's designed to talk about why, I will paraphrase here, why my hardware is no more trustworthy than any other part of my system and just as compromisable, or my machine learning algorithms are things that we're taking gambles on. So to look at some of the things that people are doing in looking forward from this, and to allow you to consider those. Because if you're putting down something that you've got a 30-year supply and support obligation on, you probably need to consider those sorts of things. And with that, I'll finish doing this.